So good day. Today we're going to speak about loan words, or in other words, borrowings, and their influence on language and culture context. So the questions under study are reasons for cultural borrowings in English, classification of borrowings according to the borrowed aspects. We'll be speaking about phonetic, semantic, morphemic, and translation loans. Classification of borrowings according to the degree of assimilation, and a little bit about borrowings in British and American language. So, first we're going to speak about reasons for borrowing in English. And what should we mention first of all? Where two different languages have contact over a certain period of time, they will surely influence each other. So words might be taken from one language and adopted to another. This process is known as borrowing. Cultural borrowing is taking ideas, customs, and social behaviors from another culture or civilization. While taking ideas, customs, and social behavior, we enrich our language with new words from other cultures. Thus, a cultural borrowing is a loan word adopted to express a concept that is new to the recipient language speaker's culture. So, as stated by Carol Myers-Cotton, cultural borrowings are words that fill gaps in the recipient language store of words because they stand for objects or concepts new to the language's culture. When there is cultural borrowing, there is always the likelihood that the associated words may be borrowed too. For example, when Christianity was introduced into England, a number of associated words such as bishop and angel found their way into English, and the process has continued uninterruptedly down to the present day. Each cultural wave bringing to the language a new deposit of loan words. So borrowed elements that fill a lexical gap in the recipient language are called cultural borrowings. They are often introduced among new concepts or with new things, such as the Japanese word sushi, the Chinese concept paper tiger, the Swahili word safari in many Western languages. Language borrowing is normally encouraged by external factors, such as geographical, neighborhood, political, socio-economic, and cultural exchange, military, and other activities between different countries. So language borrowing can be considered as a reflection and result of language and culture contacts. At present, there are about 6,000 different languages on our planet, and every one of them has a vocabulary containing many thousands of words. Whenever and wherever there are contacts of any sort between the speakers of different languages, speakers will make use of words from other languages to refer to things, processes, and the ways of behavior, organization, or thinking for which words or phrases were not available or convenient in their own language. So the most obvious and the most profound reasons for borrowing from foreign languages is the introduction of new concepts for which there are no suitable words. Borrowing words from other languages is characteristic of English throughout its history. More than 2/3 of the English words are borrowings. And language scale of language borrowing took place between languages, both historically and currently. It is part of the cultural history of English speakers when they have always adopted loan words from the languages of contacted cultures. English history, as you know, is very rich in different types of context with other countries. So English is very rich in borrowings. The Roman invasion, the adoption of Christianity in Scandinavian and Norman conquests of the British Isles, the development of British colonialism and trade and cultural relations served to increase immensely the English vocabulary. Therefore, it is of great value to study borrowings in English and try to find the basic principles underlying this phenomenon. So, to understand it better, let us consider some classifications of borrowings. And classifications of borrowings according to the borrowed aspect is our second question. So, phonetic borrowings are most characteristic in all languages. They are called loan words. Words are borrowed with their spelling, pronunciation, and meaning. Then they undergo assimilation. Each sound in the borrowed word is substituted by the corresponding sound in the borrowing language. In some cases, the spelling is changed. So the structure of the word can also be changed, and the position of the stress is often influenced by the phonemic system of the borrowing language. The paradigm of the word and sometimes the meaning of the borrowed word are also changed. Such words as we can name them, labor, travel, table, chair, people, are phonetic borrowings from French. Sputnik is phonetic borrowing from Russian. Bank, soprano, duet are phonetic borrowings from Italian. Translation loans are word for word or morpheme for morpheme translation of some foreign words or expressions. In such cases, the notion is borrowed from a foreign language, but it is expressed by native lexical units. To take, for example, to take the vowel by the horns, taken from Latin, farsex from French, living space from German. Some translation loans appeared in English from Latin already in the Old English period. For example, Sunday or solidies. There are translation loans from the languages of Indians. Pipe of peace, pale faced from German, masterpiece, homesickness, and Superman. So semantic borrowings are such units when a new meaning of the unit existing in the language is borrowed. It can happen when we have two relative languages which have common words with different meanings. For example, There are semantic borrowings between Scandinavian and English, such as the meaning to live for the word to dwell, which in Old English had the meaning to wander, or else the meaning dar, подарок, the word gift, which in Old English had the meaning выкуп за жену. So morphemic borrowings are borrowings of affixes which occur in the language. When many words with identical affixes borrowed from one language into another, so that the morphemic structure of borrowed words becomes familiar to the people speaking the borrowing language. We can find many Romanic affixes in the English word building system. That is why there are many hybrids in English, where different morphemes have different origin. For example, goddess, beautiful, and so on. According to the degree of assimilation, so here is the third question. Classification of borrowings according to the degree of assimilation. English lexicology subdivided borrowings according to the degree of assimilation as completely assimilated, partly assimilated, and non-assimilated borrowings. So non-assimilated borrowings of barbarisms, the so-called, and completely assimilated borrowings are not felt in foreign words in the language, as the French word sport and the native word start. Completely assimilated words belong to, as for the verbs, they belong to regular verbs, for example, correct, corrected. Completely assimilated nouns form their plural by means of S inflection. For example, gates. Semantic assimilation of borrowed words depends on the words existing in the borrowing language. As a rule, a borrowed word doesn't bring all its meanings into the borrowing language. If it is polysemantic, for example, the Russian borrowing Sputnik is used in English only in one of its meanings. Partly assimilated borrowings are subdivided into the following groups. You may see them: borrowings non-assimilated semantically, non-assimilated grammatically, non-assimilated phonetically, and assimilated graphically. So borrowings non-assimilated semantically because they denote objects and notions peculiar to the country from the language of which they are borrowed. For example, sari, sombrero, taiga, kvass, and so on. Borrowings non-assimilated grammatically, so they are, for example, nouns borrowed from Latin and Greek, and they retain their plural forms. Например, bacillus, bacilli, phenomenon, phenomena, datum, data, and genius, genie. Borrowings, non-assimilated phonetically. Here belong words with the initial sounds v and z, as for example in words like voice and zero. In native words, these voiced consonants are used only in the intervocal position as allophones of the sound forms like loss, lose, life, live, live, live. And some Scandinavian borrowings have consonants and combinations of consonants which are not palatalized. For example, the combination ski, ski. In the words like sky, skate, ski, and so on. In native words, there are the palatalized sounds denoted by the digraphs ch, for example, like in shirt. Sounds k and g before k and g, before front vowels are not palatalized. For example, girl, get, give, kid, kill, cattle. In native words, there is palatalization. For example, German child. Some French borrowings have retained their stress on the last syllable. For example, police and cartoon. Some French borrowings retain their special combination of sounds. For example, the combination of sounds "wa" in the words mémoire, boulevard, and borrowings can be partly assimilated graphically. For example, in Greek, borrowings Y can be spelled in the middle of the word. As in words symbol and synonym. PH denotes the sound F, like in the word phoneme, morpheme. TH denotes the sound K, like in the words chemistry and chaos. And PS denotes the sound S, like in psychology. And the last group are non-assimilated borrowings, known also as barbarisms. So these are borrowings which are used by Englishmen as a seldom and are non-assimilated. For example, tête-à-tête from French, dolce vita from Italian, duende Spanish, gonzo Italian, addio Italian, and so on. So, classification of borrowings in English and American according to the language from which they were borrowed. This is a kind of resource classification from what culture and country the loan words have been taken mostly during the period of British and American history. And of course, we are starting with Latin and Greek borrowings. The eldest one. Among words of Romanic origin borrowed from Latin during the period when the British Isles were part of the Roman Empire, there are such words as street, fort, wall, and so on. Many Latin and Greek words came into English during the adoption of Christianity in the 6th century. At this time, the Latin alphabet was borrowed from the runic alphabet. So these borrowings are usually called classical borrowings. And here belong Latin words like altar, cross, dean, and the Greek words like church angel, devil, and anthem. And Latin and Greek borrowings appeared in English during the Middle English period due to the great revival of learning, of Renaissance. These are mostly scientific words because Latin was the language of science at the time. These words were not used as frequently as the words of the Old English period. Therefore, some of them were partially assimilated grammatically. For example, formula, formulae. Here also belong such words as memorandum, minimum, maximum, veto, and so on. And classical borrowings continue to appear in modern English as well. And mostly they are words formed with the help of, just a moment. So these are words help with the formed with the help of Latin and Greek morphemes. And there are quite a lot of them in medicine. For example, appendicitis and aspirin. In chemistry, like acid, valency, alkyne. In technique, engine, and biplane, headroom. In politics, socialism, militarism, and names of sciences too, such as zoology, physics, and others. In philology, most of terms are of Greek origin. They are homonym, archaism, lexicography. So next we come to French borrowing, and just a moment. So next goes French borrowings, and the largest group of borrowings is French. Most of them came into English during the Roman conquest, which lasts almost 300 years. And French influenced not only the vocabulary of English, but also its spelling and documents where they were written in French, as the local population was mainly illiterate, and the ruling class was French. So runic letters remaining in English after the Latin alphabet were substituted by Latin letters in combination of letters For example, was introduced so just a moment. Um, the letter V was introduced for the voiced consonant V instead of F in the intervocal position. For example, first it was Lufian, then appeared love. The digraph CH was introduced to denote the sound CH instead of the letter C. So it became chest instead of cest before front vowels where it had been palatalized. There are the following semantic groups of French borrowings. So these are words relating to government, like administer, empire, state, and government. Words relating to military affairs, like army, war, banner, soldier, and battle. Also words relating to jury as advocate, petition, inquest, sentence, barrister. Words relating to fashion, luxury, coat, collar, lace, pleat, embroidery. Words related to jewelry, topaz, emerald, ruby, pearl. And words relating to food and cooking, lunch, dinner, appetite, some name it appetite, to roast, to stew. Words were borrowed from French into English after 1650, mainly through French literature. But they were not as numerous, as many of them are not completely assimilated. There are the following semantic groups of these borrowings. And here we may see words relating to literature and music, such as belletria, conservatoire, brochure, news, period, vaudeville. Words relating to building and future. For example, entresol, chateau, bureau, and words relating to food and cooking, such as ragout, cuisine. The next group, also quite large, is the group of Italian borrowings. We've got about 3 minutes. I think I may start. So, cultural and trade relations between Italy and England brought many Italian words into English. And the earliest Italian borrowing came into English in the 14th century. It was the word bank from the Italian banco, or branch. So we have only 2 minutes left. I'm going to stop the demonstration and see you after the break. So not everyone come back after the first period. And we are going to proceed with Italian borrowings. So cultural and trade relations between Italy and England brought many Italian words into English language. And the earliest borrowing came into English in the 14th century. It was the word bank, from the Italian banco, means bench, скамья. So Italian moneylenders and money changers sat on the streets on benches. When they suffered losses, they turned over their benches. It was called bancarotta. So from which the English word bankrupt originated. In the 17th century, some geological terms were borrowed also from Italian, such as volcano, granite, bronze, lava. Just a moment. I'll close the door. At the same time, some political terms were also borrowed from Latin, such as manifesto and bulletin. Nevertheless, mostly Italian is famous by its influence in music. And in all Indo-European languages, musical terms were borrowed from Italian, such as alto, baritone, basso, tenor, falsetto, solo, duet, trio, quartet, quintet, opera, operette, libretto, piano, violin. And among the 20th century Italian borrowings, we can mention Gazette, Incognita, Autostrada, Fresco, Fascist, Dilettante, Grotesque, Graffito, and some others. Next group of borrowing is connected with Spanish language. And Spanish borrowings came into English mainly through its American variant. There are the following semantic groups of them. Trade terms, such as cargo, embargo. Names of dances and musical instruments, such as tango, rumba, habanero, guitar. Names of vegetables and fruits, tomato, potato, tobacco, cacao, banana, apricot, and so on. And next one is Scandinavian borrowings. By the end of the Old English period, English underwent a strong influence of Scandinavian due to the Scandinavian conquest of the British Isles. Well, factually, it was not Scandinavian, but Danish conquest and Danish invasion. And Scandinavians belong to the same group of peoples as Englishmen, and their languages had much in common. And as a result of this conquest, there are about 700 borrowings from Scandinavian which went into English. And Scandinavians and Englishmen had the same way of life, and their cultural level was the same. They had much in common in their literature, and therefore old laws, Old English and Modern English, we can compare the words theirs, for in Old Norse. It was Old Norse, Old Norwegian. It was sisters were in Old English and sister in Modern English. And however, there were also many words in the two languages which were different, and some of them were borrowed into English, such nouns as bowl, cake, egg, kid, knife, skirt, window, and such adjectives as flat, ill, happy, low, odd, ugly, wrong, such verbs as call, die, guess, get, give, scream, and many others. Even some pronouns and connective words were borrowed, which happens very seldom, such as same, both, till, fro, though, and pronominal forms with th as they, them, their. So Scandinavian influenced the development of phrasal verbs, which didn't exist in Old English. And at the same time, some prefixed verbs came out of the usage. For example, ofniman, beniman. And phrasal verbs are not highly productive in English. No, they are highly productive. Now they are highly productive in English. So take off, giving, and so on. We have a great number of phrasal verbs with the same root verb and different prepositions after. So, and German borrowings. I'm sorry for my ill voice. I hope I will be better tomorrow. So, German borrowings, they are the last group, the last big group in English language. And there are some 800 words borrowed from German into English. Some of them have classical roots, for example, some geological terms, as you may see, cobalt, bismuth, zinc, quartz, mace, and wolfram. There were also words denoting objects used in everyday life, borrowed from German, like iceberg, lobby, rucksack, kindergarten, and so on. And in the period of the Second World War, the words like Lufthansa, Gestapo, gas chamber, and many others were borrowed into English language. After the Second World War, the words like Volkswagen. Кто там рисует на моем экране? So the words like Volkswagen was used, appeared in the English language. Так, Нурай, Алтай. Ну-ка, прекрати рисовать на моем экране. Посмотри, хулиганка, добралась. Ну, что вот это такое? Так, сейчас вот это уберу. Детский сад. So English continues to take in foreign languages, but now the quantity of borrowings is not so abundant, and even more, English now has become a given language as it has become lingua franca of the 20th century, and language borrowing not only enriches the vocabulary stock of the borrowing language, and makes up for its lexical gap, but also helps people of different nations to better understanding each other, especially about their cultures. So thus the history of English can be called not only the history of language borrowings, but as a reflection and result of language and culture contexts. And next we are going to start, as we have some time, the next topic, the linguistic and cultural aspect of translation in cross-cultural communication. Translation as a linguistic act of communication across cultures. And three different types of difficulties in translation and in interpretation, as you know, is first, multiple meaning of words. We're speaking about denotative and connotative meanings, errors of perception equivalence, such as literalism, transliteration, paronymy, and correlation of linguistic and cultural norms of translation. And when speaking about translation as a linguistic act of communication across cultures, we should mention that cross-cultural communication is impossible without translation or interpretation from the source. And the language from which a text is to be translated into another language, into the target language, and the language into which a text... Вот я сейчас кого-то отсюда выгоню. Так. So translation is a peculiar type of cross-cultural communication. It is a kind of activity which inevitably involves at least two languages and two cultural traditions. Translation is not only a linguistic act, it is also a cultural one, an act of communication across cultures. And the translation process is like a car that needs a good driver to control, for example, the wheels in the right direction. And a translator who knows not only both languages, but also both cultures, at least the translator should know both cultures. It is not only bilingual, but also he is bicultural. And process of translation in cross-cultural communication presupposes that a source message of one language should be perceived by a translator, interpreter of the other language. And this involves cognitive processing of recognizing the message and extracting the content from a code, meaning language as a system based on grammatical and semantical structures. And translation is a communication process that involves the transfer of the message from a source language to a target language. Interpreting and translation processes are examples of transactional communication. An interpreter and a translator both have dual communicative functions. So they are outputting and inputting messages either simultaneously or spoken or in written form, and they exchange and negotiate meaning with the third party. So transactional model of communication has been proposed by Bunland in 1970, and it includes interpreting and translation in the field of communication, because it is a dynamic theory which requires interdependent and simultaneous exchange between the participants to negotiate meaning from one language to another. And the transactional model is a more realistic representation of human communication. It recognizes that both people involved in the interaction are communicators, and instead of the process illustrated as linear, it becomes circular in its function. So the two people engaged constantly respond to each other by initiating messages and sending responses back and forth. So that's the process is an exchange, including the following stages. First of all, we should encode and decode messages. Encoding is the process by which information from a source is converted into symbols to be communicated. And decoding is vice versa, is the process in which the receiver accepts and interprets the message. It involves not only basic recognition and comprehension of what it accesses, but also the interpretation, evaluation of its meaning with reference to relevant codes, both verbal and non-verbal. So the second phase will be engage in role-taking and feedback. So the message and interpretation constructed by each individual are influenced by the role-taking assessment and the feedback they provide. As a person speaks, the other individual is simultaneously assessing his/her response on the basis of a feedback and maybe modifying parts of the message as well. The next one is influenced by prior communication. So the message people send and the manner in which they respond weigh heavily on what has been said previously. The process of interpretation is also influenced by physical surroundings. Different environments contribute to different modes and methods of communication. It may be influenced by the social cultural situation. The message and the manner in which it is delivered is part of an ongoing social situation that has rules for behavior. It may be influenced by social relationships. So the type of social relationship between the communicators, whether they be strangers or intimate, influences the transaction. And translation is a peculiar type of cross-cultural communication. It is kind of activity which involves at least two languages and simultaneously two cultural traditions. So translation process should be concerned with a certain text, situation, and culture. And because of differences in cultural values, assumptions and language structure, it is not possible to be meaningfully translated. I mean, word for word from one language to another. A translator should keep unspoken understandings and assumptions in mind while translated as the intended meaning of a word and may also differ from its literal translation. And according to Alejandra Patricia Karamanyan, so we are mentioning her article, Translation and Culture. The attention should be drawn to the fact that among the variety of translation approaches, the integrated approach seems to be the most appropriate. And this approach follows the global paradigm in which having a global vision of the text at hand has a primary importance. Such an approach focuses from the macro to the micro level in accordance with the principle of Gestalt, which states that an analysis of parts cannot provide understanding of the whole. So translation process should essentially be concerned with a certain text, situation, and culture. Thus, recording and decoding of the source text requires accuracy of translation. So the correct transfer of information and evidence of complete comprehension, and moreover, encoding of the source text in the target language requires appropriate choice of vocabulary, such as idioms, terminology, and kind of registers, that is cohesion, coherence, organization, some technical aspects relating to grammar, spelling, accentuation, punctuation, and the transfer of dates, names, and figures. And a comprehension processing includes perception, understanding, recognition, which implies a stored memory element, and interpretation, which suggests a creative process. So errors in speech perception and production can lead to wrong interpretation, and they can cause fail in cross-cultural communication. In some, the wrong perception in cross-cultural communication leads to wrong comprehension, lack of understanding, and wrong translation. And what can cause errors translation? Andy Gillette, in the article Intercultural Communication, states that the second language speakers of English may be unfamiliar with much idiomatic or technical English, with jargon and acronyms, not to be used to hearing English. That is our common problem, speed of delivery. So this is a problem. Not to be used to the pronunciation of some words, not to be familiar with complex language, have particular difficulty with some areas of language, have troubles in understanding cultural contradictions. Nevertheless, the greatest source of difficulty is that words often have different meanings depending upon context or culture. Thus, for example, a dry country lacks either water or alcohol. Suspenders keep up either stockings or trousers, pants. Funny is either humorous or disconcerting. A couple is either a few or exactly two. If you recognize that there is a potential misunderstanding, you must stop the conversation and ask for the valid interpretation. And there are some more examples as evidence of the need to distinguish traditions, and traditional process should essentially be concerned with a certain text, situation, and culture. And because of differences in cultural values, different assumptions and language structures, it is impossible to be meaningfully translated. So word for word from one language to another. A translator should keep unspoken understanding and assumptions in mind while translating, as the intended meaning of a word may also differ from its literal translation. And the last example, for example, the word fish can be used to refer to either a live fish swimming in a river, that one that got away, or a dead fish that has been cleaned and is ready for the frying pan. In English, fish can be used in both cases, and ambiguity in meaning may cause confusion in what is conveyed and lead to different interpretations in the cultural context. And potential translation for a given word we'll be speaking about is acceptable on a given occasion or in a given source text. In order to produce good translation, you must have a thorough knowledge of the both languages and an ability to deal with differences in meaning that appear insignificant until you cross over to the other language. Besides, translators are faced with alien cultures that require that its message may be conveyed in anything but an alien way. Well, to my experience of interpreters, the most difficult thing in interpretation is when both representatives of both sides are speaking on their native language. Yes, when the English is the language of intercultural communication, but it is not native language for both sides. So we are done for today. We've got only 4 minutes left. I'll see you tomorrow during the seminars.